Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, three film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week, our new releases include Oscar hopeful Gravity and Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. We're also going to take a look at some of the more peculiar choices that the Academy has made for Best Picture over the years with this week's Top 5. Our new classic this week is Joe's favorite film of last year, Dredd. Our old classic, chosen by Justin, is the 1950 Jimmy Stewart film Harvey, and our Oscar nominee A to Z film this time is 1988's The Accidental Tourist, which earned an Academy Award for Gina Davis. We've got a lot to get to this week, so let's get right into the new reviews. We're going to start with Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs 2. Now, Cloudy 2 returns us to the world of Swallow Falls and inventor Flint Lockwood, and takes place immediately following the first film. In the sequel, the island gets evacuated so that the Live group, led by Flint's hero Chester V, voiced by SNL alum Will Forte, can clean up the leftovers from Flint's food machine. While they're there, the cleanup crew discovers that Flint's machine is actually still working and now creating food-animal hybrids, so Flint and his crew go back to the island to try and stop it. The film is a worthy follow-up to the original, complete with the fun characters, an endless supply of food-related puns, and also, I think, with a better villain this time around. The addition of the Foodimals is also clever and fun, though, like in the first one, the movie's brand of humor does wear a bit thin. The interesting thing I think about this movie, and the first one as well, is that its style is fairly unique to other kids' fare out today. It's got a classic tone, complete with corny jokes and puns, music by the likes of Paul McCartney, but it's also in your face and fast-paced, so it's sort of to me like vaudeville on crack. Even Flint's over-exaggerated motions are unlike anything in other kids' films, and I think that makes it stand out. It does indeed wear thin, like I said, after a little bit. Andy Samberg's Brent character is completely annoying, as he was in the first film. And the animation isn't super great, but the kids will love the colors and the Foodimal and the jokes that they get, and the ones that they don't get, I think their parents will love. So Cloudy 2, for me, gets a B. Joe?
I pretty much agree with everything you said. I thought that it was really cool that this movie took place directly after the first one. I thought that it was cool that it followed up with that. And I also liked that it continued on with the storyline between Flint and his dad, which is one of the best elements of the film, the original, I thought. So that was kind of cool to see. One of my big problems with the first film was that I thought the villain, the mayor, I believe, was kind of wasted. This time I thought they had a really cool...
Don't you think the villain's a lot better this time?
They had a really cool mad scientist guy. I could really get behind him. I liked all his flailing arms, his holograms, kind of this old school comic booky guy. I really liked that. He was cool. And his plan, while admittedly cliche, was pretty awesome. Really, I thought the Foodimals, once again, kind of went directly from the last film that I was building upon. And the humor, I thought, was kind of cute to begin with, but I actually thought it also did wear kind of thin.
Yeah.
Really, by the end, it was getting a little bit tedious. I thought the message of the movie was nice, but not as strong as in the first film. I thought they kind of glossed over it a little bit because it seemed like, while building upon the friendships of the first film, they had already established that strongly, and then they kind of teetered off from it. But like, oh, no, it's fine. So, in that term, I guess I thought it was, alright. But overall, it was fun, it was entertaining. I got to see more use of the side characters, which I really wanted to see from the first film.
Yeah, Sam and the dad really get a lot more to do, I think, in this one.
And I was really happy about that. So for me, it was a slight improvement over the last one. I guess I'd say I'd give it a B-.
Okay. Justin?
This is really one of those sequels that you would think that you might get a little bit more of the same, but it really does add on. And I really did like, as you guys put it, that it takes place pretty much immediately following. That said, I think it tries way too hard to be cute and less about actually being funny or necessarily enticing. The story also goes off in a lot of very strange directions. As you put it, the general message of the movie is there and it's prominent, but it goes off in a number of directions and you don't really ever get back to it. It sounds like they try to focus on it in the first act and then it just never returns.
They just kind of wrap it up quickly.
Exactly. It feels shrugged off. And it's kind of a pity, because I was really looking forward to them exploring that. I really want to echo Dan's aspect on the animation. Honestly, this time around, it felt kind of stiff in sections, and I'm not quite sure what was up with that. I don't know if the budget was less this time around, or if they were just trying to get a product out as fast as humanly possible, but it just seemed a little bit less to me. Overall, I liked it about as much as the first one. Some things are improved, some things are still lacking, but not bad for family fare. I give Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs a C+.
Just interject with your comment about the animation. I actually noticed that too, and I think I might know what it is. In this one, because the island was completely covered by food, it was a lot more colorful. Mm-hmm. But one thing I really liked about the first movie, animation-wise, was that the backdrop, they put a lot of detail into the buildings, and that kind of really stuck out in contrast to the really cartoony characters. Everything looked kind of cartoony in this one.
But you would still think that they would animate that so it's a bit more lively instead of just background.
I thought that the characters were still pretty fluid. Dan, do you think that the movie was trying too hard to be cute? Because I kind of like the cuteness.
Well, I like the cuteness. To be honest, probably my favorite scene in the whole movie is, I want to try not to give too much away, but because it is towards the end of the film, but it's when Flint gets up to speak to the Foodimals, and they don't understand what he's talking about, so Barry, the strawberry, goes up and translates. That was the cutest thing I think I've seen in a movie in a long time. It made me laugh so hard. Like I said, I think that the brand of humor in the Cloudy movies gets a little old. I don't know that it's necessarily a cuteness problem, as it is a corny joke problem, or the puns get old, maybe. I don't know. I didn't really have a problem with the cuteness of the film.
I like the marshmallows.
Yeah, the marshmallows were cute.
Watermelephants.
Yeah, the watermelephants. I mean, all the Foodimals were pretty cute. Mm-hmm. Did either of you see it in 3D? Because I did not.
I did not either.
You did? Okay. Was the 3D any good?
Honestly, I was really impressed with the 3D. I really came together. You saw a great sense of range with it. Admittedly, I was sitting a little closer than I usually do, but overall, I was pleasantly surprised by it.
Because I think in kids' movies, it's easier to tell if you see it in 2D what the 3D would be like. Because I think in kids' movies, there's more sort of jumping out at you, and certainly a movie like this. So when I saw it, I did wonder how the 3D would compare. But let's move on to our next movie, and that is Gravity. And Justin's going to tell us about that.
Alright, so Gravity focuses on Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, who play Ryan Stone and Matt Kowalski, a medical engineer and an astronaut on a space shuttle mission that goes terribly awry when their ship gets hit by space debris. They end up getting stranded and desperately losing oxygen. The two have to venture out into the depths of space in hopes of reaching a new ship or satellite that may be able to get them home. This is one of those movies that the 3D completely lives up to the hype. It complements the film. It really gives an aspect of, can 3D help film as an art form? There are so many scenes in this where the 3D just gives the movie new life in the most subtle of ways. There's this one scene about a quarter of the way in where it's a wide shot and it's Sandra Bullock trying to keep hold of George Clooney. It's just the most exciting thing, even from so far away, and just keeps drawing you in. It's almost hypnotic in that sense, and I just really got into it. I gotta confess, I'm not a huge Sandra Bullock fan, but she did a phenomenal job in this role. I truly was impressed by this, and I would be completely surprised if she does not at least get a nod for a Best Actress nomination for this. One of the most unique things about it, though, is I really liked how they dealt with coping with the concept of death in these truly, truly intense situations. And they do it with very little dialogue, which I thought really benefited from it. Admittedly, there are some minor flaws, most of which I can't really say too much about without giving spoilers. But overall, this was a fantastic movie. It was so much better than I thought it was going to be. For anyone who's willing to withstand it, definitely see it in 3D. It's well worth the price. Gravity gets an A.
Did you think it was not going to be good?
I thought it was going to be good. I didn't think it was going to be that good.
Okay. I mean, I was pretty excited early on about this one. I mean, these are two of my favorite actors. I know you don't really like Sandra Bullock that much, but it did live up to what I thought it was going to be. I agree that Sandra Bullock is definitely going to get her second nomination for this one. I doubt that she'll win again, not even knowing what the competition is, but, you know, they don't like to usually reward people that soon after another win. I mean, it does happen. But I think, for sure, not only is it a great performance, but after The Blind Side, I think the industry just in general has a new respect for Sandra Bullock. So I don't see her not scoring a nod for this one. The 3D was subtle. And I liked that. I wish there was more depth a little bit, but the 3D wasn't, except for some of the flying debris parts and stuff, it wasn't necessarily in your face, but it was always present. And I really liked that. I agree that it really put 3D to a good use. It was something a little bit different with 3D, just visually, seeing the Earth in the background and them in the foreground. It was very nice. I'm finding more and more, even though George Clooney is one of my favorite actors, he does seem to give pretty much the same performance in every single thing. We just saw The Ides of March last week. We're seeing him in the previews now for The Monuments Men, which is coming out. But for me, he's one of these actors that it doesn't matter. Like Philip Seymour Hoffman, maybe. There's a handful of people that pretty much give the same performance in everything they're in.
If it ain't broke.
But if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I thought they had a fantastic chemistry together. My only real problem with this movie is sort of the problem of all movies of this ilk, where it's largely based on one or two people. I mean, they're pretty much the only people in the whole film. And the reason that somebody is stranded, like a castaway or something like that, is that there's a crisis, and then it gets solved, and then there's a new crisis, and then that gets solved, and then there's a new crisis. And for me, it loses a little bit of momentum, I guess, because every 5 minutes there's a new crisis to solve. But that's sort of the design of films like these, so I can't really fault the movie itself for that. So for me, Gravity also gets an A. It's on the lower end of the A scale, but definitely when you compare it to some of the A minuses I've given out this year, it's definitely better than those. So Gravity gets an A from me as well. Joe?
Gravity, I think, pretty much echoing what you guys said. In terms of the 3D, I like what you said, how it was kind of very fluidly integrated, and it's not something that pops out, but just in general, the effects work in this film was really great. You really felt like you were in space, and just that sense of isolation and also that intense danger that they have to deal with, just kind of being in orbit, trying to avoid all the debris and trying to keep as much oxygen as they have, and they're pretty much all they have to survive is basically their relationship. Mm-hmm. They have to work with each other. So for a survival movie like that in space, it was really good. And once again, I thought that the two leads they gave good performances. They really did. And I normally don't like George Clooney that much, but I have to admit he did a good job, and I kind of think that he was one of my favorite things about the movie because he really keeps her going.
Boy, he was great.
Like, basically this woman has a lot of baggage, and she really, as he says in the film, she has to let go. And without spoiling anything, George Clooney really helps her.
And they also don't really know each other.
No, they don't.
So, their entire chemistry is based on they need to live.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they were up there, 7 days,
mm-hmm.
they said, and that's all the time they'd gotten to know each other. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic as well.
And it's kind of cool that really one of the things that helps them get through this is basically getting to know each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, like I said, that is what keeps them going. And Sandra Bullock, also not a huge fan of her, but she does a really good job in this movie. And I don't know, I think that in terms of just the disaster every 5 minutes, I thought that was kind of cool because it just seemed like it was never going to stop. Like, oh man, just having this really, really rough couple of days up here. But it was good. It was entertaining. It was enjoyable. I felt that really in a lot of ways, plot-wise, it was somewhat limited. But I think this is one of those cases where just the atmosphere and the visuals of the film really get it going. My only problem is I thought that some of the imagery and symbolism was a little heavy-handed. I mean, there wasn't a lot of subtlety there for a couple scenes. So overall, though, I still thought it was a pretty excellent film. I'd settle on giving it an A-.
I will say it's, with all the horror movies we've seen this year, Insidious 2 and The Conjuring, which we both talked about on the show, I thought this was actually one of the scariest movies of the year.
A different kind of terror.
It was a different kind of terror.
It was gripping.
It wasn't, I saw it sitting right next to Justin, and I was jumping a few times. A few times I sort of curdled in anxiety or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely worth its weight in intensity, I would say.
It's basically kind of the difference between horror and terror, just building up those two different atmospheres.
Yeah.
Suspense more even.
It was suspenseful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the best way to put it. It's in a really intense situation, and the director does a really good job of putting you in that situation, putting you in her shoes. And that's one thing that critics were saying, is that they do a really good job of portraying what it is to be like in the situation from space, as much as they can fictionally. And they stayed true to it pretty much almost entirely scientifically correctly.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really impressive. I mean, like I said, from a purely visual perspective, it is pretty amazing. And that's really what makes it stand out.
Well, up next we've got Runner, and Joe's going to tell us about that.
Well, basically, Justin Timberlake plays a college student from Princeton working through his master's degree. And to basically get himself through college, he runs an illegal online gambling thing. And, well, he makes some money doing that, but turns out that he gets in trouble for it, gets confronted by the dean, and basically finds out that his entire education is on the line. So he tries to do one last little gambling bet thing online, and, well, naturally, he loses everything. But what does he do? He decides to track down the kingpin of illegal gambling, who is now outlawed down in Costa Rica, to confront him, say that he was cheated, and see what happens. And lo and behold, he becomes part of the organization, and, of course, a lot of trouble ensues. Which is one of the biggest problems with this movie. I mean, this character was a complete idiot. What did he think was going to happen? I think that it pretty much sold me from the trailer. Okay, you're going to go down, confront this guy. Ben Affleck plays Ivan, the crime boss guy. And he's just like, oh, I'm going to work with him and everything's going to be fine. But then he finds out that the FBI is coming after him. Corrupt government officials are coming after him. His boss is coming after him. This character Justin Timberlake plays, he's just really unlikable. And I think that's one of the problems I have with the movie is that he's really unlikable. And I didn't really feel like that I could get behind him. I actually was more on the side of the bad guy because he made more sense to me. His business plan is like, hey, you know what? You want to get millions and millions of dollars? Well, yeah, you're going to do what I say. I mean, what's going to happen?
He is what you'd expect.
He's what
you'd expect that character to be.
Exactly. And that's my biggest problem is that I really couldn't get behind him. In terms of the plot, I mean, it's okay. Nothing really glamorous. I feel like there are a lot of conveniences. Nothing really original there. And there's also this one really bad chase scene. There's only one chase scene in the whole movie, but it's full of the worst shaky cam I've ever seen. It was it was hurting my head. I couldn't even follow it. The acting was all right. Justin Timberlake did okay. Ben Affleck did okay. There are a few other actors in there. There was actually somebody from Breaking Bad that randomly made an appearance at the beginning of the movie, and that made me happy. But overall, I would say that, with the exception of a few good cinematography choices and some half-decent performances, there really was nothing special about this movie. But it was so over the top and silly that I did find myself somewhat entertained by it, so I can't really give it a horrible grade. I'm going to leave Runner with a C-.
Oh, what can I say about Runner? Well, here's a couple good things about Runner. I think Ben Affleck is a decent actor. I've said this before, I think, on the show.
Decent.
I think he's a great director, a decent actor. However, for me, one of the bright spots in the movie.
Agreed.
I agree with you that his character was certainly the best laid out character in the film. And I thought Affleck did a good job with him.
With what he had.
With what he had. It affirmed to me what I already think, that he's not a terrible actor. The ending was decent, completely predictable, but at least it gave the movie an ounce of life.
Not to interject too much, but I have a question for you regarding the ending.
Sure.
One thing I didn't mention that kind of disappointed me was I felt like the stakes were never that high. Because...
No, they really weren't.
Ultimately it was inconvenience. Maybe some elements of people's future would be destroyed, but it's not like we were talking about death and torture here.
Right.
Once again, couldn't really get behind anybody because I wasn't really that worried about this obnoxious kid.
Right.
Continue.
I understand. Well, sort of along with that whole thing, forget about the plot holes and the things that were stupid or didn't make any sense. The movie's just boring. It's a boring movie. I wasn't really engaged with any of the characters, other than the few minor things that I said. I mean, to me, it was a little bit like The Lone Ranger in the sense that I was bored, and then the last, 20 minutes was kind of like, oh, okay, I'm kind of into it a little bit. It is better than a lot of the movies that we've seen this year in this sort of vein. Getaway certainly comes to mind. So I'm going to leave Runner with a D+. Justin?
Well, I definitely have to echo you on the boring beyond words statement. This is a stock movie in the very sense of the word. I have little that I can say that's positive about it. The acting ranges from mediocre to bad. I know you guys think Ben Affleck is an okay actor. Personally, I think his better years are behind him. I think he's really much like Brad Pitt when we talked about him a couple of podcasts ago. He's very, very good as a second man. Case in point, Good Will Hunting and Shakespeare in Love.
Have you ever seen Jersey Girl? I thought he was fine as a leading man in that. Ben Affleck, that was decent. He played the character fairly well for what the character was. I'm sorry, but
Didn't you think he was good in Argo?
He was decent in Argo.
I mean, he was the lead of Argo.
He did pretty well in Argo.
He has two modes. Bad, and he has okay. And this was one of those kind of bad. I think he's a very good director. I don't think he's that good an actor. This is definitely one of the case in point examples of him not being a very good actor. That said, I completely follow you on the means of he's kind of what you see is what you get. I mean, he doesn't throw any punches that weren't already blatantly obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Basically is a gambling movie through the first 2/3, and then the last third decides it wants to be a heist movie. Neither one works. I will confess the first, I want to say 10 minutes had me kind of curious as to what this was going to do, and then I just slowly started caring less and less. It's just not a good movie, and that's about all I want to say about that. Runner gets a D.
All right, and I'll wrap it up with one that I was the only one that saw, and that is Metallica Through the Never 3D. This is basically a concert movie that Metallica put together. It had a limited run, but I got to see it this weekend, and I was pretty happy that I did. I'm a big Metallica fan. I've seen them twice in concert, so I was able to really compare it to my own concert experience with Metallica. Now, when I heard the original concept of the movie about how it was going to be half a concert and half a story, I sort of thought, okay, well, I don't know how this is going to work. It seemed intriguing, but not really that appealing. But luckily, they went in the much more concert direction than I thought they were going. The one actor in the film is Dane DeHaan, who you may know from the movie Chronicle. He was basically the star of that film. And he enters the picture in the beginning. He's basically like a roadie's helper. And so he's able to get backstage for the concert as they're setting up and all this. And as the concert starts, they sort of send him on this mission. And basically what happens is between every song, there's maybe like 45 seconds to a minute and a half of him doing something with the storyline. And then interspersed in the songs a little bit here and there, they flash to him and whatever the story is. But by and large, it is a concert movie. You get to see full song performances by Metallica, which I really, really liked. That's one of my biggest gripes about some of the recent concert documentaries like Katy Perry and One Direction. You have part of the song, and then after like the first or second chorus, then it goes to the home movies or whatever, and they just play like the instrumental version of the song. This was full 6-7 minute performances from Metallica, and it ran through the whole movie. Now the storyline was not too exciting, and it didn't really make a ton of sense by the end of it, but it essentially acts as a music video backdrop anyway, and how many music videos are there that don't make any sense? So that part I just sort of didn't really affect me all that much. My only other real problem with it was it gave you a great feel of Metallica on stage, but it didn't give you a great feeling of being in the crowd. The Metallica crowds are a lot more rowdy than they showed in the film, and I don't mean that in like a punching each other kind of way, but there was literally one crowd shot where a woman was just sitting there in her seat with her arms crossed. They didn't obviously focus on her, but she was in the shot. And I just thought, that's not the Metallica experience I've had. So I thought that was a little off. But for a concert movie, it really, really did hit the mark. And for me, Metallica Through the Never is a B+. All right, now we're going to move on to our top 5. And this is an interesting one this week. The Oscar nominee movie that we watched was The Accidental Tourist. And as we're going to hear later on in the broadcast, that was not one that we were a fan of in any sense of the word, and we'll give our reviews for that later. But it got us thinking, this thing was up for Best Picture in 1988. It did not win, but it was nominated. So we decided to put together a list of our top 5 movies that we think the Academy missed the mark on. These should not have been nominated for Best Picture, in our opinion. And since I think there may be some discussion with some of these, we're going to just read off one at a time and sort of talk about them a little bit. And we're going to start with Justin.
All right. Now, before I go further with the list, I want to clarify something. The criteria for this list was based on the films nominated. It's supposed to represent the best of that particular year for the Academy Awards. These are not necessarily bad movies. To be honest, the majority of them are quite the opposite, at least for me anyways. Just, I don't believe they were deserving of a Best Picture nomination. So without further ado, here we go. Number 5. Dan, I apologize. Jerry Maguire. Now, before the onslaught begins, I would like to say that I love the concept of this movie. That said, it's a concept that I think works much better in theory rather than in execution. I think Cameron Crowe's an awesome director. I think he's put together some great movies. Jerry Maguire, I thought was good. I didn't think it was amazing, even though the Academy seems to think otherwise. Almost Famous, I also thought was awesome. The big issue for this one for me comes from the fact that it has probably two of the most criminal miscasts I have ever seen on film. Tom Cruise just didn't sell it for me, and Renee Zellweger just was not great as a love interest. And I do confess, I think the movie gets overquoted, so that may have factored into it for me. So I do plead a little bit of possible personal bias. But honestly, I just thought it was fluffy. I didn't think there was anything that really stood out about it. It was good. I just didn't think it was, as I put it during the preface, the best of the best.
I sure do. I thought it should have won Best Picture that year. It is in my top 10 movies of all time. I'm so sad by this choice from you. First of all, I think Tom Cruise was an excellent choice. I think he did a fantastic job. I know that you're not much of a Tom Cruise fan, and I think that has something to do with why you think he was miscast.
Actually, quite the opposite. I think he's great when he wants to be. It's just...
I'm pretty sure he always wants to be.
More often than most, he doesn't. Like, I think he was great in Risky Business. I think he was really good in Magnolia. I just didn't think he was doing a great job in this one.
But I feel like you have a problem with the character also. And that's partially why you didn't like the movie.
Actually, quite the opposite. Like I said, the concept of the film I love. I think it's a great idea. It's just how this came together didn't work.
Who would you have rather seen play Jerry Maguire?
Someone who's at least willing to take it at face value and not be as hyperbolic as Tom Cruise. I believe last time we had this conversation, I said John Cusack. I go back and forth as to whether or not that
Oh my god, that would have been awful. Sorry, that would have been such a different movie and a terrible, terrible movie.
I think overall I would say that Tom Cruise is a better actor than John Cusack.
I agree. However, I think he would have fit the character better. I think Tom Cruise tends to overplay it sometimes, which I think happened a lot in this one.
I think the character needed to be overplayed. I think that's how he was written.
He was kind of overdramatic anyway.
He was overdramatic.
Like, remember that whole scene when he gets fired? I mean, that's something the character was supposed to do, and Tom Cruise just kind of was accentuating that.
When he's in his office screaming, "Show me the money, I love black people," that is the character. And I guess that's why that led me to that question.
And that is very nice.
Because that's
Tom Cruise.
character.
It is.
That's a character-specific issue, I think, with the movie.
Maybe, but I just didn't feel it coming together. Like I said, I do not consider this a bad movie, and honestly, whenever we do get to it in Oscar nominee Thursdays, I'm actually really looking forward to revisiting it, because I honestly do think it deserves a second go-around.
Well, yeah, you've only seen it once?
I have only seen it once, that's correct.
Okay, well, I've probably seen it about a dozen times.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, it's one of my favorite movies. Every time I watch it, I love it so much. Do you think Cuba Gooding deserved to win Best Supporting Actor?
For this one specifically, yes. I thought he did a great job. And that brings up one big thing that I think Tom Cruise does really well, which is he makes the guys around him look significantly better. In this case, Cuba Gooding Jr., who doesn't get nearly as much screen time as him in the film, but helps him really come to life.
Personally, I think Cuba Gooding Jr. really just stood out the most.
It's a good character.
It
but
is.
he really just put a fine point on how funny he is.
I think that it kind of goes both ways. I think that Cuba Gooding Jr. gave him such a good performance as well, because those characters really did sync well with each other.
They worked well off each other, I agree.
I think it balanced out, though I will admit I think that is the key thing that really makes it a worthwhile movie. I can kind of see to some degree where you're coming from, but I don't think it's a bad film in any means.
No, honestly, on my entire top 5, this is probably the one I feel the most guilty about.
All right, we're going to move on because there's probably a lot of ground to cover. But I will say that year, The English Patient was the film that won Best Picture, which I have not seen, but by all accounts, it will bore me to tears. So just wanted to throw that out there. I am going to pause real quick before we get to your number 5, Joe, because we did have an interesting comment from one of our podcast listeners. Because last week on the show, we spent a good deal of time talking about Sally Field, how she maybe should have been nominated for Absence of Malice, which was our Oscar nominee movie last week.
Uh-huh.
And through all of that conversation, we didn't actually talk about the people that were nominated or that Katharine Hepburn had won, et cetera, et cetera. And he would have liked to hear, okay, well, she didn't get nominated, but who did and who won? Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very valid comment.
Yeah,
so
definitely. From
here on out, we'll definitely try and to hit that home.
All right. Well, my number 5, once again, don't think it's a particularly bad movie, but I was kind of really underwhelmed by it when I saw it. And it might be because I knew what the twist was and was kind of bogged down by parodies and everything. And that would be The Crying Game.
That's a good movie.
I've actually never seen it.
I think it's a decent movie, don't get me wrong, but I feel like, I believe it was Forrest Whitaker's character. In the early part of the film, he was in the... I
saw it when it came out, so I didn't even know who Forrest Whitaker was then.
Admittedly, it was one of his first performances. I really liked him. I was disappointed to see him kind of go, because he's, I think, gone within the first 10 to 15 minutes. It's a decent movie, but I honestly thought it was rather slow, and it really took its time, and I just didn't think that it really was that gripping or intriguing. Admittedly, the twist was decent for the characters involved, but I didn't feel that it was anything that really left me with a feeling of anything really special. I thought it was decent, but for Best Picture at the time, I think compared to some of the other films of that year, I don't think that it really should have been Best Picture. But Dan, maybe you could shed some light on that?
Well, the movie that won that year was Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood movie.
Uh-huh.
And actually, I know what you would have wanted to win Best Picture, and that's Scent of a Woman.
Thank you for pointing that out. Yes,
one of your favorites.
As I was looking through the list and as I was making my list, I was comparing it to the other films of that year. So if I saw one or more films I thought should have gotten Best Picture and then looked at the one and disagreed with it, that's basically how I came to my decision. So this would be yes. Crying Game, thought it was good, but as Unforgiven or Scent of a Woman, I think that they were better films that would deserve it.
I like The Crying Game. I knew the twist ending. I mean, I was in, early high school when that movie came out. I think it was a secret that was kept for probably 4 or 5 months, and then it was all over the place. It was kind of like The Sixth Sense in that way. Like The Sixth Sense, you had a few months with it, but then if you didn't see it by then, it was over for you. You knew.
Mm-hmm.
But I did like the movie. I actually am excited to see it again, whenever we get to it in the Oscar show. And Justin, you'll get to see it for the first time, so...
Can't wait.
I'm actually going to do my number 5 and number 4 together because they're from the same year.
Okay.
And then we'll get to Justin's number 4. Hopefully, you guys won't be too upset with this one. My number 5 is District 9.
Oh.
And my number 4 is A Serious Man. This was in 2009, which was the first year that the Academy reopened the Best Picture nominees to be more than 5. They had 10 nominees that year, and I think because of that, some things got in there that didn't necessarily need to be. Now, that was the year that The Hurt Locker won. Avatar was up for it. Up in the Air. The Blind Side. There was a lot of good movies that were up that year, and I feel like maybe the Academy just was a little bit unsure of how to go about it, and by proof of that, the next year they changed the requirements to, well, it doesn't have to be 10 movies. It can be anywhere from 5 to 10 movies, depending on who voted them number 1 of the year or whatever. So I think even the Academy was thinking, well, maybe not all of these movies deserve to be in it. What their thoughts obviously were on District 9. But just some of the movies that came out that year that I would have much rather see be nominated: Where the Wild Things Are, Crazy Heart, 500 Days of Summer, and to me, if you're going to nominate a sci-fi movie from 2009, it should be Star Trek. I don't hate District 9. I believe I gave it a B when I originally graded it. It's a decent movie, but, sort of like Justin with Jerry Maguire, in a field of a couple hundred movies that come out every year, it doesn't make the cut for a top 5 or a top 10 for me. Joe, I know you're a fan of District 9. Is this...
Well, I don't know. I think that they were trying to cover ground, and it was smart that they did. I think I'm pretty happy with it being nominated just because it did something so different, and it really told a really interesting angle of that kind of story. And it really did have a lot of interesting commentaries on some really important ideas. And the performances were good, the action was good. I thought it was a very unique and pretty darn good story. A little messy maybe, but I'm fine with the nomination. Do I think it should have won? No, but I'm happy with the nomination spot.
I'd have to agree with that. I thought it was a very unique sci-fi film, and it was definitely one that was trying to push the envelope a little bit. Did it have its flaws? Absolutely. However, it still came together and it still presented a unique and an interesting vision. I thought that was a very smart decision on the Academy's part. A Serious Man, I know a lot of people didn't see it. I thought it was a wonderful movie. I give it an A.
Wow, I think I gave it a C+. I did not care for it.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought it was okay.
The Coen Brothers are kind of hit or miss for me. I've seen them wow me. I've seen them completely disappoint me, like obviously you with A Serious Man. Mm-hmm. But I thought it was really well acted. I thought the storyline was well crafted. I don't quite understand why they seem to be struggling with endings, but I thought it was a decent choice.
Well, and I think you hit on something there with the Coen Brothers being hit or miss. I feel like sometimes the Academy does get stuck in a bit of a rut of, well, we like this director, so pretty much everything they do is good. Tarantino falls into that category. It just so happens everything Tarantino does is good, but, I think a lot of times they fall into that category with Woody Allen, et cetera, et cetera, and I think the Coen Brothers is in that same vein. They were just coming off of No Country for Old Men, which obviously was huge at the Oscars. I thought that movie was decent. But as a Serious Man, it didn't hit me. And I feel like any of those movies, I know you're a fan of Where the Wild Things Are.
Yet I probably would not have given that Best Picture. I thought it was a good movie, I just didn't think it was that good.
I don't think it was very accessible.
Well, and I guess kids' movies have a hard time with Best Picture anyway, and they already had Up that year. But at the same time, there's no quota for, genres. I will admit that I thought it was kind of cool when District 9 got nominated. It was actually before I saw it. I saw it after the nominations were announced. But I thought it was cool that it was something that nobody really expected and that it was a sci-fi film, because I think that's a genre, much like superhero movies, that does not get a lot of love from the Academy except for maybe, sound effects or editing or something like that.
And that's one of the good things about it. I think maybe that's what it was, more of just a gesture. The Academy's beginning to realize, okay, we have to kind of include these other areas of film. They are legitimate genres that have to be acknowledged.
Right. Well, and I think that's why they basically decided to open it up.
It might have just been a coincidence.
Well, the show was getting sort of stale. I mean, in all the articles I've read at Entertainment Weekly, that, okay, these 5 nominees that nobody's even seen, and so let's open it up. These guys won't win, but at least we'll throw them into the mix, and et cetera, et cetera. But let's go ahead, Justin, with your number 4.
All right, my number 4, also a good movie, just on what I would consider the best of the best for the given year, Juno. Now, I have to give this movie a lot of credit. It essentially came out of nowhere, and based on just a couple really good trailers, it won over a bunch of audiences and made a killing. That said, I did not think this was that groundbreaking that it should be up in a category reserved for, as I put it before, the best of the best. I thought it worked well for what it was. It tried to portray it both in a serious and funny context, doing a relatively good job with both. I just thought it was out of place, to be honest with you.
Okay, well, your list is like a dagger to my heart, because these are both in my top 25. Juno is one of my favorite movies ever. Here's what I'll say about that. Now, first of all, it did win Best Screenplay, so obviously the Academy thought more of it than just, a little nod to Best Picture. That was the year No Country for Old Men pretty much swept all the major categories. But Juno itself aside, because Juno for me was an A+. I loved it. I mean, I could go on and on about that, but we've talked enough about Jerry Maguire, so for time's sake, I won't. But I think that having a comedy represented in Best Picture is not a bad thing. Every year you get maybe one comedy, but it's such an underrepresented form. It will get an occasional screenplay nomination. Occasionally you'll get somebody with an acting nomination, usually in the supporting category, like Alan Arkin in Little Miss Sunshine, for example, who won. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I mean, maybe for you, Justin, there were better comedies that year, but I don't think it's a bad thing to have at least a comedy every year in the Best Picture race. Because otherwise, at some point, the Academy should just adopt the Golden Globe thing and do a drama category and a comedy category, because comedies never win at the Oscars.
And I completely agree with that. However, to me it seemed at the time, like last year, it would have been all the nominees and then This Is 40. It just seemed out of place. It still was an okay movie, it just wasn't that good.
You didn't think the writing was... I mean, obviously, my biggest complaint, and I guess everybody's probably with Juno, is that sometimes the dialogue was a little trying too hard to be witty. But other than that, I mean, I don't think it's a fair comparison to This Is 40. I thought the writing was a lot sharper in Juno. I thought the concept was great. The Jason Bateman and Jennifer Garner characters were just phenomenal. Again, I could go on and on about how great Juno is. Joe, you saw Juno, right?
Uh-huh. I don't think it really was a Best Picture type of film. I really liked it for the subject matter that it addressed, and I did like the performances. I thought some of the writing was fairly witty. However, it was a bit dry and obnoxious at points for me. And
maybe obnoxious is the word I was looking for.
It was a bit obnoxious for me in terms of the writing, and I'll be perfectly honest, this could just be me. I did not think it was funny. I did not remember laughing much at all, Juno. So
okay.
That might just be my particular brand of humor. I don't know, but I just thought in that term it didn't work for me as a comedy, but it was a decent movie, but I don't know if it was Oscar worthy for Best Picture.
Maybe that is a reason that comedies are hard to get in the door at the Academy, because it is so subjective.
It really is. We've talked about that before.
Yeah, we have. I mean, a drama, you can see, okay, well, Gravity, Sandra Bullock and George Clooney are out in space, that's frightening, that's, you can... maybe more relatable.
It's hard to argue
from
with
the heart.
A basic concept like the
right.
the fear, the love, the hate. These are general things we can all grasp onto.
Right. Whereas comedy is a little harder.
A little bit.
One of your favorite movies, or actually I guess your favorite movie last year, Justin, Moonrise Kingdom, to me seems to be in the exact same vein as Juno. I was honestly a little surprised that with 10 nominations now, it didn't get nominated.
Same.
But I mean, don't you think that people could have the exact same complaint about Moonrise Kingdom as with Juno?
Possibly, but I think the big difference with Moonrise is I think it did stand out more as the best for that year, because there were narrative components and stylistic components, for that matter, that complemented the film and pushed the envelope for it. It was trying to tell a simple story, but doing it in a unique and fascinating way. And I thought that worked well together with the environment and Wes Anderson's traditional quirkiness. Juno, I just thought in a lot of ways it was good for being a comedy drama, but when you're looking at it as the best, that was 2007. That was still a 5-slot year, correct?
Correct.
I don't think it deserved a 5th slot. I still admit it is a very good movie. I do enjoy it. I've seen it twice. I just think there could have been better things that would have fit the bill. And I do see your point on the fact that comedies are kind of the black sheep in the Best Picture category, and I think that should get addressed more. But
especially mainstream comedies. Like when comedies get nominated, it's like Midnight in Paris. Yeah, I mean, Juno was a big hit.
It was, and I think the success story is well worthy of admiration. I think,
but not a nomination.
Yeah, it's just nomination worthy.
We're gonna move on. Joe, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is kind of controversial, but you guys might be able to understand it, and that would be Forrest Gump. Now, once again, I think Forrest Gump is a really beautiful tale. It's simplistic, but it's also very heartfelt, and it's fun, and, good characters you can get behind, some really funny dialogue. I like this movie, but I'm the kind of person that if I really like a movie, I will watch it over and over and over again. And Forrest Gump is the kind of movie I think I've only seen maybe twice, which for me is not very much. And honestly, I think compared to some of the other films that it was up against that year, I just didn't think that it was worthy of winning, which it did. And I'm fine with a nod. I think a nomination was fine, but the win it got, I think that it just wasn't quite that level. It was a good movie, but I didn't think it was really groundbreaking, to be honest. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I'm not going to fight you on it. I think it is definitely worthy of a nomination. I think 1994 is one of the best years in film history. Pulp Fiction, Shawshank, Quiz Show was a great movie, but I think Forrest Gump is very overrated. I don't think it deserved to win in that field.
I think it's a very overrated film as well. And once again, Shawshank Redemption, I really think it's pretty close to being the perfect movie, if there is such a thing. I think that should have won, in all honesty. I'm not afraid to say that at all.
All right, well, I guess we'll go to my number 3, which is Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close, another Tom Hanks film. Speaking of Forrest Gump, I thought this movie was a ridiculous choice for a nomination. It was not good. Some of the earlier ones on my list, like I said, District 9, a good movie. I just didn't think it deserved a nomination. Extremely Loud didn't deserve to be anywhere near the Academy. I think I gave it a D+. It's just a bad movie, and I'm not going to say any more than that. Justin?
My number 3 is The Blind Side. Now, Dan and I have butted heads over whether or not this or District 9 should have been a part of the 10-slot edition for the Academy Awards. This, I think, was much more of an issue. While I agreed that Sandra Bullock was well deserving of a nomination for Best Actress, honestly, I thought this was a above average Hallmark movie. I think it was.
I just can't. This list.
No, continue.
Am I wrong?
Yes.
Well, continue.
I mean, yes, it's cute. Yes, it's heartfelt. Yes, I did feel warm and fuzzy inside, but it's fluffy. It really is. Nothing really stands out about it other than a really good performance from Sandra Bullock, and honestly, it just didn't seem Best Picture worthy. And I'm sort of floored as to why anyone decided to put it there.
You know, I liked The Blind Side, and I would go as far to say that plot-wise, it is a pretty solid movie. However, I think the best thing about it, which really surprised a lot of people, I was okay with her anyway, but I thought Sandra Bullock gave a really, really good performance in this movie, and I think that's what got people to notice it, and they were deserving of that. I thought the performances overall were good, and it was a good story. I think that it did what it was supposed to do. But I don't know if I would say that it was Best Picture worthy.
Well, I gave it an A. There were 10 slots. It wasn't in my top 10 for that year, but it was pretty close. So for me, I thought it was a deserved nomination. 2009 is really, what a year for the Academy.
Weird
to
year.
go from 5 to 10 nominees and just some interesting choices. I will definitely agree with that part. All right, Joe, you are number 3.
Once again, I don't think it's a bad movie. I like this movie. It's fun. I'm a big fan of musicals. However, that would be Chicago.
I knew that was going to be on your list.
Once again, I don't think it's bad. I think it's fun, but once again, I think compared to some of the other runners-up, I don't know if I'd say it was Best Picture worthy. Yes, I mean, it was good to see a musical get that kind of recognition. I think it helped bring musicals back. There were some fun performances. I think Richard Gere, Catherine Zeta-Jones, I think even Queen Latifah was pretty entertaining. I liked it. It was good. It was fun. But I just can't really say anything specific. I just don't think that in terms of everything, I don't know if it was really as good a runner-up. Plus, Renee Zellweger as a lead actress is not my personal favorite. I don't know. Maybe that's what brought it down a little bit for me.
Admittedly, I haven't seen Chicago since I was like 13, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I really liked it. I thought the performances were very good. When I heard that it won, I was very, very angry because I was really pulling for Lord of the Rings to take it home. And I thought the performances were really good. I thought the stylistic components really helped accentuate the surrealist elements of the musical.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, I was a lot more at ease with the fact that it got nominated. I mean, that it got nominated and won, excuse me, after having watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a deserved nomination. For me, it's an A film. The performances are great. The music is great. Just even all of the other stuff, the costumes, the set design, Queen Latifah singing. It was just all very good. Renee Zellweger is really taking a beating today. I thought she was amazing in Jerry Maguire. I thought she was serviceable in Chicago. She was not my favorite part of the movie, I will admit that. But
I guess I'm coming at it from a plot perspective or something a little bit more
that's okay.
dramatic.
However you want to come at it.
I guess. I mean, once again, don't think it's bad, but I just think that... I mean, could you humor me, Dan? What were some of the other nominees? I think I saw a couple that piqued my eye.
Yes, well, like Justin said, Lord of the Rings.
Of course.
Which was The Two Towers that year.
Mm-hmm.
The Hours.
Okay.
The Pianist.
Yeah, okay.
And Gangs of New York.
Okay, those are why. Thank you. That's what
angered you about it.
Pianist, yeah. Gangs of New York, one of my personal favorites, yeah.
Okay, definitely.
So I guess there's some reason there. But once again, I think maybe misplaced a bit, but it won, it's fine.
But let me ask you this, because the category tonight is top 5 questionable nominees. Mm-hmm. Are you saying that Chicago, obviously you didn't think it should win, and Forrest Gump as well, mm-hmm. But, I mean, do you think that they should not have even been nominated in the Best Picture slot?
It's hard for me to say because it was a really good musical, but I don't know. I guess it was okay that it was nominated, but I'm not sure if it would have been my first choice.
Well, one of your favorites was also out that year called About Schmidt.
That's true.
So I'm sure you would have rather had that nominated.
Exactly.
Adaptation was out that year. About a Boy was out that year. There were a lot of good movies that year.
There you go.
I'll admit it. Okay, so my number 2 film on the nominee list is another musical, Moulin Rouge.
I knew this was coming.
This movie is abysmal. It makes me really, really question Nicole Kidman's acting ability, certainly her singing ability. I just hated it. It was so terrible. And the fact that it got so much attention and accolades, other than the Lady Marmalade song that Christina Aguilera and Pink did, nothing good came from this movie. It, to me, definitely did not deserve to be nominated. Now, Justin, you have finally seen Moulin Rouge, right?
I've seen it twice.
Oh, you've seen it twice. Okay. And?
While I do get your opinion on the fact that it's questionable, there's not really a musical I can really compare it to. And I thought it had some very interesting stylistic aspects. I don't like Baz Luhrmann. I think he's very heavy-handed. I think he tries way too hard to get the audience's attention and cram everything in front of them, only to slow it down later. Admittedly, I go back and forth on it, but I think it was at least deserving of that in terms of being a unique film and slightly pushing the envelope. Do I think it was perfect? Absolutely not, but nomination, I could see that.
A Beautiful Mind won the year that was out, and there were a lot of really good movies that were out that year. Some of them I have not seen, but just, hearing tell about them. Memento,
good.
The Royal Tenenbaums,
good. Monsters
Ball, Monsters Inc.
Okay.
Well, if we're going to nominate Pixar movies like they have been, for me, that movie just was not doing it. Did you? You never saw Moulin Rouge, did you?
I've seen Moulin Rouge.
You did? Wow, okay. What did you think of it?
I thought in terms of set design, I thought it was beautiful. It had some cool stylistic choices, as Justin said, but in terms of the plot or characters, I didn't really like much about it. I think it's kind of overrated. I don't think it was deserving of a nomination, really. But it was unique, and I mean, if you're really into musicals, it might be worth a shot, but I have no great love for the movie.
Okay, fair enough. Number 2?
Number 2. Well, the good news is here, Dan, you will probably not be hurt by this one. Extremely loud and incredibly close.
Oh, what a terrible movie.
Much like Jerry Maguire, this is a great concept, though executed horribly. As Dan and I noted when we first saw it, the trailers for this were amazing. We were really, really excited about it.
Yeah, the trailer made me tear up.
Then once seeing the movie and seeing the complete ridiculous mess that it is, it's frustrating. And I feel like people just nominated it off what they saw in the trailer, which I think needs to be taken into consideration for future Academy Awards ceremonies.
Joe, you never saw that movie, did you?
No, and I don't think I'm going to.
No, don't do it. Well, we'll have to eventually, but...
Well, it won't be for a few...
Won't be for about 7 years, so don't worry. All right, Joe, what was your number 2?
My number 2 is Avatar.
Wow.
Now...
Brave, man.
Oh, my next one might be even braver.
I was not expecting that.
Well, neither was I, but really I was thinking about it like this. And I think it's actually been brought up by both of you, gentlemen. Avatar is a pretty decent film. The best thing about it is the visuals. In terms of visuals, it was great. It redefined everything with 3D. Of course, absolutely. And that was really awesome. In theaters, great experience. But everything else was pretty average. In terms of storytelling, it didn't really bring anything new to the table. It's just kind of reiterating the same basic ideas that have been shown over and over and over again. Admittedly, it did it in a new way, but I don't think that, just from a storytelling perspective, it was groundbreaking. Maybe a nomination for the visual effects, but I'd never consider that to be like one of the big categories like Best Picture. I don't think it was deserving of that, especially compared to, once again, some of the other nominees. But hey, feel free to combat me on that.
Well, I sort of think that with the addition of the 5 extra slots for Best Picture, that every year we see one of these movies that is so striking visually and all of the technical categories. This past year it was Life of Pi. The year before it was Hugo.
And this next year will be Gravity.
And this year it'll probably be Gravity. I think you're right on that. And Avatar was part of that group the first year that they upped the nominees to 10. And I do think it deserved a nomination. But what I do think was very sort of outlandish is that it was more or less, maybe not a front runner, but at least neck and neck with Hurt Locker of who's going to win. Oh, ex-husband, ex-wife, who's going to win? That was the big showdown. I didn't think Avatar had a shot at Best Picture, personally.
I'm just saying, that's what seemed kind of silly to me. There were better caliber films out there. I don't know. I just feel like it was kind of odd to put it there. It was nice to acknowledge it, but I don't think it was really deserving of Best Picture. Like, the way I look at it as a nominee, they think this one might win. And I just think that's pushing it a little bit.
I think because of the technical aspects of it, it was obviously the most groundbreaking movie of probably the past decade.
But I don't think that's enough for a film to win by itself.
I understand that. And then, of course it didn't win, but I do think the nomination was deserved. Justin, did you think that was a deserved nomination?
Yeah, you said that was with 10 nominees that year, correct?
Correct. That was the first year with the 10.
Yeah, I think with 10, it's definitely deserving. Storyline, admittedly, there's good, there's bad. It may be average, like you say, but it was a huge technical innovation for cinema, and I think that needed to be taken into consideration with 10 nominees of things that were truly trying to push the envelope. And that really was at the heart of Avatar, trying to put together these visuals that literally made you feel like you were on another world. That said, I think the whole, as Dan put it, that year it was this big James Cameron and Catherine Bigelow debacle, husband versus wife. I think that was way overplayed. The Hurt Locker just narrowly escaped my top 5.
Not a big fan of it either, to be honest.
Also falls in the category of not a bad movie,
Best Picture worthy, really?
Best Picture worthy is up in the air.
All right, well, we are up to our number ones, and the top 5 is Best Picture nominees that we don't think should have made the cut. My number 1, I gave an F to. This movie is so pointless, I don't even want to say much about it, but it is The Tree of Life. I hate Terrence Malick. All his movies are terrible. I gave another one of his films this year an F called To the Wonder. And what hurts me the most about this nomination is that this was a really decent year for movies. The Descendants was up for Best Picture. The Artist, which won. Hugo, The Help, Warhorse, which was really good. And a lot of movies that I personally really enjoyed didn't make the cut. My number 1 movie of the year was Bridesmaids. Say what you will about it. I know Justin's not a huge fan, but it did get a supporting actress nomination and a screenplay nomination. So a Best Picture nomination was not out of the realm of possibility. Also, there were some really good foreign films that year, A Separation being one of them. I think that should have been nominated for Best Picture as well, much like Amour was this year. So for me, not only is it an awful choice, but there's just plenty of really good choices that could have been nominated. Justin?
My number 1 is Mystic River. I'll be honest, the first quarter of this movie I loved. I thought it was a really interesting story with great characters and a really compelling mystery. And then the second act, it gets worse, and I have no problem calling by the end of the third act, it pulls out one of the dumbest, forced, makes completely no sense whatsoever endings I have ever seen committed to cinema. The performances are okay at best. you'll pretty much end up hating all the characters. I really don't understand why anyone really got into this movie.
I liked Mystic
I got
River.
into this movie.
I mean, maybe you guys can point out something that I didn't get, but I really just was not a fan. I don't understand why this got nominated.
Admittedly, it's been a while since I've seen it, but I remembered that it was a very dark, kind of twisted tale, and it had a couple different turns that I didn't quite expect. And I will admit, yeah, the characters are despicable, but they were kind of supposed to be. And I actually thought that the performances were pretty good. I mean, Tim Robbins, one of my favorites, did a good job in that. I don't know. I thought they were pretty decent. Like I said, it's been a while since I've seen it. Yes, I've only seen it once. It wasn't like the best movie ever. But I don't know. I thought that it definitely was unique at the very least. And I thought visually it was pretty good. Captivated me, had a strong atmosphere to it. I mean, I think it was deserving of a nod.
I definitely think it was deserving of a nod. Justin, at least you will be happy to know that year Lord of the Rings Return of the King was the winner. But I think Mystic River was good, but it does bring up my point earlier that the Academy goes with what they know. It was a Clint Eastwood movie, and I think, regardless of what you think of the movie, that probably helped it land a nomination.
Good point.
But I do think, granted, that was before I watched movies in the volume that I do now, so I didn't see a lot of the other movies that were out that year. I saw Lost in Translation, which got nominated. So I don't know if I can really say, well, there were definitely 5 better movies than Mystic River, but I did enjoy it. I think it was a fine film. I don't think a nomination was absurd. Joe, what's your number 1?
My number 1. You ready?
I don't know.
Well, okay. I'm going to go into this saying it was a decent film, but I think it's incredibly overrated. And a twist does not make a good movie.
Oh.
It's going to be The Sixth Sense.
Oh, man.
I'm sorry. I don't like this movie that much. I never have. And like I said, I can understand to some degree why people do like it. I mean, it had some cool elements to it. Yes, atmospherically. It had some cool little techniques. I mean, it was good. I don't think it changed the game. There were twists before this movie. The 90s was defined by twists. Okay, there were a dozen movies that had good twists, better written twists, before this movie. I saw the twist coming in the first 15 minutes. Maybe that's me. And I was a kid when I saw this. Okay? I did not think this was groundbreaking. Yes, Bruce Willis does a good job, but I'm just saying, I don't think it was Best Picture worthy.
That was a blow my mind kind of twist. Both in the movie and you putting it's your number 1. I had no idea. And I was a grown person by that point. I was in college when that came out. I had no idea what was happening until the end. I thought it was a great movie. I do think, I don't know if Game Changer is, you might be right about that. Maybe it wasn't a huge game changer. There were twists before. The Crying Game had a twist.
7 had a twist.
7 had a twist. But I do think the cultural phenomenon surrounding that movie, much like maybe The Blind Side, or much like some of these other movies that get nominated, that are successful movies at the box office, I think people take notice of that, and maybe if The Sixth Sense only did half the box office that it did, maybe it wouldn't have been nominated.
Well, hey, that might be possible. I mean, I think I've seen better movies of his that should have gotten nominated and didn't, so maybe that's something.
That is my favorite of his. Is yours Unbreakable?
Might be.
Okay. Justin, do you have any thoughts on that, Sixth Sense?
Admittedly, I have to confess I was part of that generation that had the twist ruined for me.
That stinks.
However, I thought the majority of the time they were kidding until I saw the first 15 minutes, and then I was like, that actually kind of makes sense. While I don't think it was groundbreaking, I still think it had a lot of good characters, a lot of good storylines. We didn't really have anything like it. I was a kid when it came out, and I was trying to get from adults what exactly was this movie, and every single one of them wouldn't give me a straightforward answer. It wasn't really a ghost story. It wasn't really a mystery. It was kind of a hybrid of a bunch of different things, and I thought that was interesting and made me want to learn more about it. And when I got to seeing it, I thought it was really, really interesting and really well put together.
I would be interested in watching it again, because I have only seen it once. So now that I know the twist ending, maybe it would be interesting to...
I've seen it multiple times.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything for you.
Maybe, admittedly, the first time, yes, it was pretty solid, but I just think that after multiple viewings, maybe it does take it away a bit. But like I said, you guys can judge that for yourselves.
Well, some of the movies that did not get nominated for Best Picture that year, when The Sixth Sense did, being John Malkovich, Boys Don't Cry, Girl Interrupted, and Magnolia.
There you go.
So there were definitely some good options out there. All right, well, that is our top 5. We're gonna move pretty quickly through these other movies, as obviously we're running a little long this week. First up is the movie Dredd, and that was our new classic this week, and Joe's number 1 movie of last year, so I'm going to let him take this one.
Oh, I love Dredd. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
I have to say, after Stallone's rather cheesy movie, and admittedly some people hate it, I think it's okay, movie from the 90s, this one is really a much more faithful representation of the character. It's very gritty. It really sets up this amazing tone. Basically, it follows Dredd, who's this law enforcer in the mega city of the future, and that's pretty much it. He and a young partner go to stop this evil drug lord who has taken over a building, locks them in, and it's basically a fight to the top. And it's pretty much just a solid action movie. There is really no major flaw that I could find with the film. I think that stylistically it was great. Fantastic soundtrack, really good set design, and also I have to give props. Carl Urban really just does an amazing performance as Judge Dredd. He really is. He even kept his helmet on to stay true to the character instead of just taking it off to get more face time, which is really admirable. Shows what a great performer and a good person he is. He respects the source material, just like he does a great job doing his great DeForest Kelly impression as Dr. McCoy. That's what it is. He does a great job, and I just think he's a great actor, and he does that well. The female lead was also really good. I thought that even though they could have just sort of sidewinded it, did kind of maybe a romantic element, they stayed clear from that, which I liked. Just made her a strong character all on her own. The villain was memorable. The slow motion 3D effects were really cool. I mean, they were very, very grasping. Admittedly, it doesn't bring a whole lot more to the world than just setting up the basic atmosphere for it. The plot doesn't expand too much on Dredd's character, but it's really just trying to set things up as a normal issue in the comic. And if you want to argue that's what the goal was, it really succeeds. Hopefully a sequel would expand on it more, but really for what this film represented, I think it was really, really good. I wish more people had seen it. I think it's an underrated film. I really enjoyed it, and I'm going to say it's honestly one of the best comic book films I've ever seen in terms of its goals. I give Dredd an A-.
I was definitely disappointed with the box office take of Dredd. Nobody went to see it.
It did well in England.
Oh, well, hey, great. Now, I thought your grade was going to be a little higher than that. Because you did tell us it was your number 1 movie of last year.
Well, I do take into account my personal feelings.
Okay.
So
okay, so I see what you're saying. So
like,
your favorite film.
I could see that a film maybe does a little bit more. It could have been an A+. I admit I was thinking about giving this one an A, but I'd be lying if I said that it was 100% perfect. I'm a comic book guy. I like my action movies. I like Carl Urban. I like the techno music. I mean, I'm taking my personal feelings into account here. But I still think, despite that, it's a really good movie. I don't think there's anything major wrong with it. And maybe I'll find out I'm wrong tonight. But,
okay.
But I really liked it. I have to say, I think it's an excellent movie.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to clarify that. Mm-hmm. Justin?
All right. So I'll kick this off by saying this is leaps and bounds above the horrible Sylvester Stallone movie from 1995. Here's the problem, though. Judge Dredd, admittedly, I have not read the comics. He is a comic book character that there's only so much anyone's going to be able to do to bring him to screen. Bear in mind, this is largely just coming off of what I've seen from the character thus far. He's intense, we get that, but we don't also understand a whole lot about him, and that factors into it. And I think because of that, we're only going to get so much from him. I think the simplicity of the storyline helps. It doesn't get overly complicated. Carl Urban does a great job at accentuating what I'm assuming the character is supposed to be.
Pretty much.
The action is good, possibly reminiscent to the Raid, but I do think there are some substantial differences. However, a lot of the plot components to give it that 3D effect through this drug, I say that in quotes because it feels less like a drug and more like a let's just have an excuse to throw 3D in there, called slow-mo. Just feels like, okay, let's do something cool with the violence and that'll draw people in. I mean, yes, it's interesting, but it also feels gimmicky. The villain, I agree, was memorable, but things just were a little too easy. And I think that took it out of it. Overall, I think this was a good movie for what it was. I think comic book fans are going to love it. But I still stand on the fact that there's only so much you're going to be able to do with the Dredd movie. And this is probably the peak of that matter. Dredd gets a B-.
Alright, one of your points. You said that it was easy. Would you mind going into details on that? Because I seem to remember a volley of machine guns and Dredd getting shot through his abdomen and having to fight, well, other judges. Spoilers. I don't think it was easy.
That was part of the reason I didn't want to go into detail on that. A lot of the answers to that would involve spoilers.
Well, I'm going to have to touch on it a little bit because I really don't think it was, easy. Even for Dredd. I mean, first of all, he is Dredd. He's supposed to be an unstoppable force, really. Yeah. But I think under the circumstances, there was certainly a sense of danger.
There was. However, I feel like things wrapped up a little too quickly. And that's all I can really say without throwing in too much.
I think they did wrap up kind of quickly, but admittedly, that might be the writers kind of putting themselves in a corner. But I think the solution to the problem I think you're hinting at was kind of clever.
It was. I just think there were ways they could have built it up. And perhaps saying it was too easy was not the right word. Mm-hmm. But just the way they chose to close the overall conflict just felt like, well, we're here. Let's have this happen.
Okay. Also, another one of your points as far as the slow-mo drug, I felt that it was kind of an induced experience, sort of visual. Yes, it was a gimmick, but seeing it in 3D was awesome. I will admit that when I was viewing it again, I think one reason it didn't get as high a grade is because outside of the theater, it didn't have quite as much of an awesome experience, but it still looked cool. You said it was a gimmick, but I think it was a gimmick that worked. It wasn't an excuse, yes, but I thought they implemented it fairly well. In terms of his character, there is a little more they could do with it, and I think that they actually could expand more with different storylines because there are other villains and things they could do. They could build on the world more. I think they were just keeping it simple as a good introduction because, as you said, I think, if you tried to throw all these different things in the comics, kind of like they did in the first movie, it would just be too much. So I think they went the smart route with this one.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I would still welcome a sequel because even though we've had Judge Dredd in 1995 and Dredd, obviously, last year, we've only really scratched the surface of him. No one's ever had a sequel for him. Mm-hmm. So no one who hasn't read the comics knows anything more about this character.
That's true.
So, I mean, I would still welcome a sequel. I just think, based on everything we know about him, this overly serious judge who sole purpose is to be, as you put it, an unstoppable force and shoots guns, I feel like this is probably the bulk of what we can do with him, which might be expanded upon with another one, but the only way to know is to do a sequel. So I guess we'll see.
Dan?
Well, with the box office take, I don't think a sequel is ever going to happen. But I do recommend the first movie for sure. Just for time, I won't go into too much detail, but I thought the slow-mo stuff was awesome. I did not get tired of it. I mean, it was a little gimmicky, I suppose, but movies...
It stands out.
It does stand out. Movies like this sometimes do need something to stand out. And like you said, it's very reminiscent of the Raid Redemption, and I think this is one thing that does make it stand out a little bit from that film. I love that Carl Urban, didn't take the mask off. We've discussed that. The word you used, Joe, respect for the character, I think really nailed it. He respects the source material. He respects the fanboys. I mean, everybody loves Carl Urban, let's just face it.
He's great.
And I do love that the entire movie basically took place in one building. I saw this before I saw the Raid Redemption, which also takes place in one building. But I will say, I gave both movies the same grade last year, and that is B+. Justin, let's go to you for your pick for this week's old classic, and that was Harvey.
All right, so Jimmy Stewart, my favorite actor of all time, plays Elwood P. Dowd, a man who loves nothing more than meeting new people with his best friend. An invisible 6 foot 3.5 inch tall rabbit, or Pooka, named Harvey, much to the dismay of his sister, played by Josephine Hall. Though after an attempt to institutionalize Dowd goes horribly wrong, it's up to Dowd and Harvey to help fix things and prove that there's no shame in being a little strange. I know that you two were new to it, so...
Well, I'll go ahead. I have to say that for a movie as old as this was, admittedly I do like Jimmy Stewart, but I was wondering that as a comedy, how good it was really going to be. But I would say within the first half hour of this movie, I thought it was really, really funny. We were all laughing, I think, when we saw this. I just thought some of the lines of this movie were so witty and just downright hysterical. I thought that it was rather timeless. Some of the humor was just really smart, and I liked that. But it was also simple, and it had heart to it. And just that whole fact that it was built upon a series of circumstances, basically trying to keep this guy out of the insane asylum while people were trying to get him into the insane asylum, was just hilarious. And I also thought that there was a lot of really interesting commentaries about society at the time, and there were just some really good messages and overall themes to the movie. I think James Stewart gave a really good performance, probably one of the best I've ever seen. There really isn't much more to say about it. I thought the rabbit gimmick was really cool, and I also like the fact that they kind of teased the idea of this. Is this kind of a shared social consciousness thing? Is this guy crazy, or is there a supernatural element to this? And they kind of dance around that. They never give you a full answer. I think it's implied a bit strongly towards the end of the movie, but I thought it was really, really good, with the exception of a couple minor characters not really developing as much as I think they should have. I'd say it was an amazing movie. I really liked it. I thought it was a great pick, and I'd give it an A-.
All right, yeah, I thought Harvey was absolutely hilarious. I thought that the character of Elwood is just really great and well written. It does touch on some interesting notions of how mental health was seen at the time, but it is interesting to sort of see him go about his daily routine with this rabbit who, is he imaginary, is he not, can other people see him, who's crazy, who's not. It was very farcical in nature. The jokes were fast and funny, and you're absolutely right that the jokes themselves were timeless. And to me, stuff like this goes to show that you don't have to be filthy to be hilarious. Almost every successful comedy these days is rated R, and a lot of them are very, very funny. I just talked about how much I love Bridesmaids. Mm-hmm. But everything is super clean in this movie. It's just pure funny.
Good clean.
It is. And it's only, for me, the third Jimmy Stewart movie that I've seen. He is clearly one of the greatest actors of any generation. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing some other of his work. I'm really glad that you brought this one to the table, Justin. I don't think this is one that I would have picked out on my own otherwise, but I'm really, really glad that we got to watch it because I thought it's a hysterical film. And for me, Harvey gets an A.
Oh, wow. I was expecting an A- from you, actually.
No, it was very good.
All right. I've seen a significant number of James Stewart's work. I won't say I've hit the whole spectrum, but this is by far my favorite performance of his. It's one of those movies that, honestly, you could easily take the plot, shift it to modern day, and with the exception of maybe a couple locations, the humor would still work relatively well. We got a bunch of really complicated characters, especially with Elwood, who, despite his quirky exterior, we end up seeing much more to him around the second act, and one of my favorite scenes of the entire movie. One big thing that they keep trying to hit home in a relatively G-rated fashion is the fact that Elwood struggles from alcoholism, yet we only ever see him with a drink once in the entire movie. And in that scene, he completely sells it while still having that same positive, quirky personality that we've fallen in love with prior to it. I thought his wordplay was hilarious. I thought his interplay with the other characters was fantastic. Admittedly, like Joe said, there may be some romantic subplots that come off as a bit schmaltzy, but overall, I thought this was a wonderful movie. It's timeless to the very extent of the word. I loved it when I first saw it. I love it even more now. I can't wait until we explore this again as an Oscar nominee. Harvey, what else can I say? A.
And I really do think farce is one of my just favorite styles of comedy. I just love the miscommunications and the people running in and out of the different rooms, and it's a visual form of comedy, but also there has to be something going on beyond the visual, and the jokes here really, fit the bill.
Kind of a heavy influence on sitcoms.
Yeah, absolutely. This movie was from 1950. I can see this movie very much being influential to things like I Love Lucy and, even up to date as Three's Company or that kind of thing. All right, our final movie is The Accidental Tourist. That was our Oscar nominee film, and we all don't have too much good to say about it. As I said earlier in the broadcast, that was sort of the reason for our top 5 films that should not have been nominated for Best Picture. This one was not only nominated for that award, but also Adapted Screenplay, Best Original Score, and it won Geena Davis a Best Supporting Actress Oscar. William Hurt plays Macon Leary, an author of guidebooks for business travelers, whose life is in turmoil after the murder of his 12-year-old son, and he's trying to hold his marriage together in the aftermath. Macon goes home to visit his family and get away from it all. And when he boards his dog, he meets Muriel, a dog trainer played by Geena Davis, and she pushes herself into Macon's life, and you can probably figure out the rest. This could have been a really interesting character study, but instead nothing at all works about this movie. William Hurt shows about as much emotion as a coma patient. His entire family and most of their side stories are completely irrelevant and unnecessary. And even Geena Davis, who I normally really like, is very annoying here. How this was nominated for Best Picture in a year that included movies like Big and Who Framed Roger Rabbit is a true mystery. The only really good things I can say about it is, by the end, William Hurt actually started to show a little bit of emotion, and I could see that the chemistry between him and Geena Davis was okay, but I am really shocked how this did so well at the Oscars. Joe?
I have to agree with you. It seemed like basically every scene in this movie was half a scene. You thought that things were going to develop and go somewhere, but they almost never did. I thought the performances were pretty subpar. I thought that there was very little character development, and I didn't really understand why William Hurt's character was someone that these two women were fighting over. And it just felt like the whole movie went nowhere. It was just a complete disappointment for me, really. The only good thing about it for me was Geena Davis, honestly.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting point, because his wife that he separated from does halfway through the movie try to get him back. So right, they do end up fighting over him.
It seems out of nowhere.
And it's like, why? He's just not.
I thought that the cool basic voiceover thing they went for was kind of cool at first too, but that got really, really bland. It just kind of really nailed it in for me. I don't know.
Just like the rest of his character.
The whole movie was just bland and underdeveloped. I didn't think there was really much great about it at all. I didn't understand the nomination.
I don't think I gave my grade, but I give Accidental Tourist a D+. What do you give it?
Honestly, considering the fact the only thing I liked about it was Geena Davis's performance, really, I gave it a D.
Fair enough. Justin, what'd you think?
All right, let's wrap this up quick. I was really looking forward to this because I liked Lawrence Kasdan. I think he's written a bunch of things that show his talent. This is not one of them. Honestly feel like I saw half a movie. Everything feels cut short, and yet it's 2 hours long. William Hurt does nothing for me as a lead. He, as you put it, he's got about as much liveliness as a comatose patient, and it really never goes anywhere.
Should be Frankenstein's monster.
Pretty much. I wouldn't rule it out as a comparison. For some reason, Kasdan seems to want to focus on feet for no apparent reason.
Yeah, there's a lot of foot shots.
The foot fetish.
Admittedly, Tarantino does that too, but we've had a couple movies to get used to that.
It came out of nowhere.
I didn't think the characters were particularly likable. Geena Davis was okay. I wasn't crazy about her performance either. But admittedly, the main reason I can't in full conscience give this a D is because I think this storyline, if they had spent a little bit more time developing it, could have had a lot of potential and would have been easily Oscar-worthy. The Accidental Tourist gets a D+.
I think that's about the same reason I gave it a D+. I mean, I thought, like I said, it could have been a really interesting character study with these people, but they just weren't interesting at all.
I don't know. I think potential doesn't really bring it up for me. This movie was boring, and if a movie doesn't entertain me, it failed.
Well, I guess just in concept alone for Justin and I, sometimes it brings it up a hair.
I didn't fail it. I didn't
no,
fail.
That's true.
You didn't?
All right, well, we're going to wrap it up here. We certainly appreciate everybody listening to this extended episode of Film Fanatics. You can check out Joe's very own YouTube channel, which is Merlin Boss.
Attack on Titan video.
And you can join us on Facebook, Film Fanatics, with an exclamation point at the end, or you could also follow us on Twitter, and that's at Film Fanatics Pod. And feedback always welcome and appreciated. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on Film Fanatics. Bye!